Welcome to Fire Your Hiring Habits with John Mitchell. This is the place where we dive into the world of talent acquisition, explore the challenges of today's workplace, and discover what it takes to build a thriving and successful organization.
My guest this week is Hung Lee, the editor of the leading industry newsletter, Recruiting Brain Food. Hung has years of experience as an agency recruiter, recruitment manager, internal head of talent, recruitment trainer, and founder of an award-winning online recruiting program. Hung, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for that intro. I'm delighted to be here, man.
It's good to have you. So let's just dive right in here. Life takes us in all kinds of twists and turns. How did you end up working in recruiting?
Do you know what, John? I'm one of these strange folks that actually decided to do it. I think that most people that you ask in the industry will say, yes, I fell into recruiting or it was a complete, accident or happenstance. But for me, it was a little bit of, you know what, I wanted to do something that I felt I could do. And that was adjacent to, all of this technological change that was happening at the time. So this is around about 2000, so 20 or so years or so ago.
Mm-hmm.
And the internet was obviously becoming a big deal then. Web 1 was like becoming a thing. And I thought, you know what, I have to get into that industry in some way. I tried to give programming a go. It took me about, 5 days to do 1 page of HTML, John. And I realized pretty quickly, I could work extremely hard and still be a mediocre programmer. Or I could find some other way to interact with these companies and get involved in this exciting sector. So, I came across an ad for, Tech Recruiter in London for this recruitment agency. I thought, okay, maybe that's a thing I could try. And I just went down, interviewed, and got the job, and there we go. So yeah, that was the journey in.
Excellent. Wonderful. I mean, and that's actually pretty rare as you describe it. You actually set out to do what you're doing now, because I feel like when I work with or talk with people, especially professionals, we try to bring a lot of students into, various programs, and they're like, hey, how did you get into this job? And it seems like invariably when I walk through panels or interviewing them, they're like, I didn't even know this job existed, or I started down this path and then it twists and turns and went this way. So that's interesting. You had a direct line. That's wonderful. To quote you a little bit here, previously you said, and let me see if I can get the quote right here. There's too much crap recruiting content on the internet, and that's why you created Recruiting Brain Food. What was the problem with recruiting content, and how are you fixing it?
The problem with the recruiting content is the same problem we have with all sorts of content, John. There's just simply so much of it that it was becoming increasingly difficult to find the great content that was there, simply because you had to click on 10 things to find the one thing that was actually worth your time. So I was like super frustrated with this because, whenever you click on something with a cute headline or a nice sort of graphic or whatnot, and you find actually, it's pretty much more style and substance. There's that like sense of betrayal, isn't there? You think, oh my God, they've tricked me. It's a bit of a gotcha. And I was like getting increasingly
lipstick on the pig.
Totally, man. And I was like getting like frustrated with this to the point where I ended up, just keeping an eye on certain channels that were consistent in producing great content, started archiving some great pieces that I could go back to, that evergreen stuff that, you don't want to lose track of. And then over time, I just found, I'd created a pretty useful database of really good resources and really good pieces that I thought other people might get value from. So, I just thought, what, I'm doing this anyway for my own sort of interest. How can I find a way to make sure other people get access to this? And the easiest way in which I thought to do that was simply, do a newsletter. Just say, hey, I'm going to pick out the 10 things I put in my database this week and share it with people. And if people are interested in that, great. If not, also great, because I'm doing this anyway. And Recruiting Brain Food basically started from that.
So primarily for your own usage, but then you open it up to, and now I understand you have thousands of subscribers. What does that subscriber community look like? What kind of people typically are subscribing to Recruiting Brain Food?
Yeah, it's interesting. We've actually done some analysis on this because I was also intrigued by that question, John. And it is sort of, obviously it's a recruiting and HR focused content. So that's the folks that are into it. But where they're distributed is quite interesting. They tend to cluster in big metropolitan centers. So I think that reflects the fact that, the big companies will typically carry carry internal recruiting departments or have HQs. They'll be positioned obviously in big cities. And in English language friendly environments, I guess. So, geographically, that's what it looks like. I would like to think that the people that sign up to the newsletter, which goes out on Sunday morning, they're probably passionate about the industry, I would say. I don't think anybody signs up to an industry newsletter and doesn't have maybe that extra plus one when it comes to passion for their field. So I would like to think it's those types of folks. So people that work in HQs for companies in metropolitan centers that are passionate about their work.
Gotcha. Wonderful. So let me shift a little bit from my experience and let me ask your opinion about this. So in the age of, LinkedIn and things like that, how much do you need a recruiter anymore?
That's a really interesting question, John. And in fact, it's one of those where I've played every role in the book. So I've obviously been a recruiter. Now I'm a commentator on recruiting. I tried to be a product maker, which was to kill the recruiter product. So I've done that play as well. The truth is, recruitment is, I think, so long as human beings are still being employed by human organizations, I think human recruiters are still going to be needed. I think the tooling is going to get better. LinkedIn has obviously been one of those things that has tremendously helped the discovery process for hiring. But there's a couple of reasons why human recruiters are always going to be needed. And it's all related to data. So first thing is data currency. What is current? The reality is, as soon as you commit any data to documentation, whether you write it on paper or in digital form, it immediately becomes dated. So it's a snapshot of what this person wanted at that time. But anybody who's a human being is aware that their wants and needs change over time. They could change in a minute. Change over a day certainly will change over the longer period of time, the more decay that data has. So data currency, everything that we're looking at in an automated way is already at various stages of decay. So a human being with a one-to-one conversation can basically get the freshest information. So a human recruiter, I think, can still fill that gap.
Before you go on to your next point, I have to just agree with you. I can't think of how many profiles that I've read that are like, oh yeah, I haven't updated that in a year and a half or 4 years or whatever. So I totally understand that point.
And follow up on your point, John. The reality is on places like LinkedIn, super important as it is for recruiters. It's nonetheless very much so recruiters are addicted to LinkedIn. They log in every day, and for them, it's the entire universe. But for most normal civilians, that's not the case.
Exactly.
People. I think
set it and forget it, right?
You set it, forget it. You're super activated when you're looking for work. You get a job, great. You forget it again. And so all of the data on LinkedIn, I would say 99% of it, in terms of user profiles, is probably out of date. So that's where the gap filling by a human recruiter just on a call or on a Zoom call, that's going to be essential stuff that isn't collected by a platform. And oftentimes the stuff that is not collected by platforms are the most decisive pieces of information that are going to make a difference. So the data currency is one aspect that preserves the human recruiter. The second aspect is that there's a lot of information that is never documented, no matter how current it is. Taxonomically, it's difficult to do. LinkedIn, for instance, will give you a bunch of fields to put in your stuff, and you can put all of your stuff in there. Even strengths and skills and all this type of thing. You could put all those things in. However, is there a way for you to measure the currency of those skills? I look at my profile and I've got skills in there that I haven't used for 10 years. We all know that skills decay, like information decays. I couldn't do that thing again. However, because it seems that I've got 10 years plus experience of it, LinkedIn probably ranks me very highly as a highly skilled person in this. Incorrect. I was formerly very skilled at this, but I haven't used it in anger for a long time, and therefore I cannot call myself skilled anymore. Third element, it is terrible. Everything that is collecting this data is very bad at collecting sentiment data. So in other words, it collects the stuff that I've done in the past, but it doesn't collect the want to. Like, what do I want to do now? What is my motivation to do this? And any recruiter listening to this knows that the first couple of questions you ask of any new candidate you speak to is the motivation question. What are you looking for, Mr. or Mrs. Candidate? What kind of things is going to cause you to take an interest in the job opportunity? And the candidate will tell you that. LinkedIn profile is not going to really do a great job of letting me know. And this is not me like ragging on LinkedIn. This is every single platform that collects information of this type doesn't collect the sentiment data. It's really difficult to do in an automated or a non-human way.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, great. Thank you. Super answer. Let me just do a quick follow-up. Are there positions that are best suited for recruiters as opposed to maybe others that are less suited?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, basically, there's a relationship between the sort of work that is required and the expectation required of the worker to whether you need to the level of requirement for a human recruiter to be part of that process. So rather famously, Amazon in the pre-COVID era, I don't know whether they still have this, but they had a fully automated recruiting process for some of their warehousing type of work, where there wasn't a human interactor on Amazon side at all. The person could actually walk through the entire process without speaking to a single human being, because the job at the end of the day was actually just being physically fit and being able to move boxes in a warehouse. And the reason why that was okay to operate without a human recruiter is because the deal was clear. Like, it wasn't a career for the person. It was a job for a summer. I think it was a seasonal thing. Sure. Are you available? Here's the rate. Here's what you need to do. Are you in? And some basic questions of that type. And there wasn't much value a human recruiter could add to that.
Purely an exchange of time for money.
Time for money type jobs. Again, anybody who's gone online, you've gone to Mechanical Turk, for instance, again, Amazon sort of property. You don't need to speak to a human being. That goes and cracks through. The task is clear. So where the task is simple, collaboration intensity is low, it probably isn't it's a job more than career, then yeah, a human being doesn't need to be there. But where those type of measures tick up, collaboration intensity becomes more, the complexity of the job becomes more complex, and it does become something that a human being might do for a time being, but they may want to go and do other things and build their skills, and more important decision, in other words, then yeah, that's where the human recruiter plays an increasingly important role.
Yeah, and I imagine also with positions that are scarce or very hard to find, that, if you can find the right recruiter that has other networks or other pathways, that seems to me would be another reason to, definitely be utilizing a recruiter in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the human recruiter, if you're an employing organization and you're thinking of, let's just stick an advert out there and just go through the ad response and perform the recruiting activities myself in the sense of reviewing the profiles and getting a few folks in. I think in every context, actually, a human recruiter might help, but it's going to be more important, the sort of more complex and significant the role is. It would be unthinkable, for instance, for an executive position in a business to be fully automated. That's a high touch type of transaction, should I say, and that's going to require a human being for sure.
Yeah, there's so many dimensions you're trying to match there. You're just not going to automate that.
Yeah.
So you mentioned pre-COVID. So what are some of your thoughts on the long-term effects of the pandemic on HR and recruiting?
Well, it's been huge. I mean, I don't think anybody's interested in minimizing the impact of the sort of COVID. We shut down basically big chunks of the global economy for months at a time. People shifted to online, shift to remote. That's a very sticky type of shift. Lots of people were able to deliver their work without needing to come into the office, and I think that that there is a very strong case to be made that the office needs to be rethought as a function. Like what's its purpose? So I think that yes, the shift to remote is significant. It disperses the talent geographically. That has an implication for recruiting because suddenly, hey, maybe you don't need a load of people within a geographical proximity of HQ because maybe you don't need those folks coming into the HQ every day. That should expand the overall talent landscape for you to go ahead and recruit people for. On the other hand, we also know that recruiting people that are remote and always will be remote brings into play some very interesting collaboration, communication, and cultural challenges for a company that's building value. So suddenly there's a sort of additional bits of work that needs to be done to figure out how do you integrate these people, how do you onboard them, how do you make sure they feel involved, how does it sort of how do we make sure that we still get creativity and productivity even though we are now geographically dispersed in different places. So I think the job of HR and TA certainly got much more interesting in the post-COVID era that we're in now, simply because of these challenges. But for sure, COVID is one of the you don't need to wait for history to tell you that it's going to be one of the big marking sort of milestones in the history of work.
So in our organization, we went remote, primarily remote, really hybrid, but it was primarily remote. I think it was a little over 7 years ago. So when COVID happened for us, we were kind of like, oh yeah, we can work remotely. That's not a problem. We had systems in place and things like that. So many companies, I feel like, had to just abruptly change and rapidly try to deploy these models without much thought to it. It's like, oh wait, I've got to get people together. And as you were talking about, having the right communication and reporting protocols, et cetera, just seemed to be something that maybe wasn't as thought out as if we'd had, if more people had been planfully going into a hybrid or a remote situation that would have benefited them. And I think a lot of the disdain for a hybrid workplace or a remote workplace comes from just the lack of preparation that went into it when they implemented it.
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, I remember speaking to. I actually went to a remote working conference pre-COVID, and that was like a niche conference. That was the only companies that were there were basically software companies that were themselves building distributed systems. So I think in large part they felt that they needed to be on brand to be distributed themselves as a human organization. But yeah, it was unthinkable that you would set up a company this way. You'd certainly think, yeah, getting in the office, that was the thing. And yeah, it was certainly not easy for a lot of companies to shift to a new mode of working. Having said that, though, I think it maybe needed that. I mean, there was a joke during the in the gallows humor of the pandemic period. There was a joke that COVID was the best change manager that we've ever seen, because it just
forced a lot of rapid changes in structures and cultures and use of technology, all kinds of things. Yeah.
Hey, John, the shift to remote was simultaneously a shift to digital. There were so many analog processes that went digital as a result of remote. I mean, interviewing is a classic example, relevant to the recruiting audience here. Prior to COVID, how many people were doing video interviews one-to-one? I don't think a majority of the recruiters were doing that. It was like, come into the office, let's have a face-to-face. Now, it is unthinkable for that face-to-face to be the first thing that you do with a candidate. It would be unthinkable from the candidate's perspective. If you and I went to LinkedIn right now and picked up a candidate, found a candidate, say, yeah, we want to interview you for this job, do you want to come in? They
would fly in for this first interview?
Right. They would look at us like, are you crazy? What's wrong with a Zoom?
Exactly.
So that's been a seismic shift. So yeah, a lot of analog processes have just completely gone by the wayside. And it's been a huge accelerant for HR and TA.
All right. So let me shift gears again here just a little bit. I've heard you say that there will be an increase in an alternative workforce. What does that mean and why?
So when we talk about workforce, we typically are talking about full-time employees. So if you think about sort of how companies are set up with systems, we're generally all processing full-time employees that are on site. That's working 9 to 5. That's essentially the technology set up that way. Our legal systems are set up that way. Our cultural practices are set up that way. That's default sort of employee. In fact, even today, if you were doing some, if you're doing some job design, or if you were creating a new vacancy in a business, chances are the default will be exactly that person. Someone who's still going to be in the office 9 to 5, 5 days a week, working full time as a permanent employee for your business. Now, what we've seen here is that, and by the way, this is not just a COVID trend. This trend was occurring in enterprise way before sort of COVID. Was this sense that that's actually a very inflexible way of organizing a workforce, because all of these folks are full-time employees, and oftentimes, do you actually really need that person to be working 40 hours a week every week in your business? Actually, lots of jobs don't require that. Lots of jobs may just require this person to do 10 hours a week, or perhaps 0 hours a week, just be on call and provide expertise to us when we need it. And so companies have had kind of a fairly longish trend to move away from full-time employees, as it's still going to be the dominant component of the workforce that you care about, but increasingly starting to leverage freelance, contractors, gig workers, people on platform, and so forth. And of course, the shift to remote has accelerated that trend even further, because suddenly, when a lot of people in your business are remote, the differences in terms of your experience of them as workers actually does change, because what is the difference between someone who is delivering their services in a geographically dispersed manner, away from the office? Does it really matter if they are a contractor or a full-time employee or a fractional worker, as they're calling it now these days? It probably doesn't. So essentially what I'm saying with that phrase is that companies are going to want more flexible workforces. That fundamentally means less full-time employees as a component of the overall workforce, or talent universe, as some people are calling it, that they can leverage when they need it.
Got it. So this more flexible set of workers will increase in percentage across the organization. It's not like the traditional, if I could use that word, workforce is going away. It's just reducing in percentage.
That's absolutely. You said it in 10 words that I took 5,000 to say. So,
well, that's a perfect place to stop. But coming up in the second part of my talk with Hung Lee, the editor of Recruiting Brain Food, Hung reveals the why of his newsletter.
The reason why it's called Recruiting Brain Food is because I wanted to provide something that was entertaining in an intellectually stimulating way for people I know who are smart, but might find themselves, oh my God, I've got 5 hours worth of sourcing to do. I say, okay, read this newsletter. It might make you feel better. At hour 2, jump in and read a bit of Brain Food. It'll give you a boost.
This has been Fire Your Hiring Habits. If you want to empower your organization to reach new heights, go to johnwmitchell.com to find the techniques and tools you need to attract and retain the best team and boldly reimagine your workplace. Fire Your Hiring Habits with John Mitchell is a production of Forbes Books.